So I know that most of you are here, as Evan said, because you're all interested in the mystery of the cement pad. So, so let's get right to it. Just kidding, we're gonna get to it a little later. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on Mills, and in general, my program goes over many facets of the history of Mills Reservation, and excited that Evan was so taken with the cement pad, and we'll be very interested to learn what he's gotten together. So this is a map of Mills today, and I think most of you are familiar with the, how Ridge Road, Reservoir Road, Normal Avenue makes its way around. It actually, one of the trails actually dips into Mountainside Park, high above Highland Avenue. And I'll put the reservoir in there so that you can orient yourself. So Mills is 157 acres, all but 2 of it in Cedar Grove, owned by the Essex County Park System. And it began with a 118-acre donation from the Davella Mills Foundation. And I'll explain some of the additional land acquisitions and swaps that allowed it to grow to its current size of 157 acres. So we're all wondering, how is it possible that this mountaintop is still a wooded area without homes on it, where we can watch the hawks and walk and just enjoy the wildlife. I'm going to start by just explaining a little bit about the geography of our area. So this graphic shows basically 3 ridges that are the mountains that make up the Watchung Mountains. Where the star is, that's First Mountain. So Mills is atop First Mountain in the Watchung Mountain chain. So they're actual mountains. They're not huge, but they are considered actual mountains. And there's plenty of advantages, as we know, to being on top of a mountain. We're the first tall ridge west of New York City. And we all appreciate those New York City views. We know what that does for real estate. In the late 1800s, there was plenty of information about the healthful air that people were seeking when they came out to places like Montclair and other towns along the mountain, or First Mountain or Second Mountain. And obviously, you know very well, and you'll hear more from Evan about the advantages of bird watching here. And also the mountains presented an opportunity for rock quarries. I have a few maps that I've assembled that are helpful to, just give you a little sense of its development, Mills of the area. So the first map that I have is from 1901. I don't have anything prior to that. I don't have a lot to say about the Native American history in this area, and when in fits and starts, I get to do additional research on this project, and one of these days, will research even further back to see what the first deeds for this land say. But given the location of the Mills property and some of the names on this early map, I suspect that much of the land was owned even before this 1900 by the Spears, who were one of the major landowners, certainly on that side of Upper Montclair, which was at one time called Speartown. They were the Dutch that had come down from Bergen County, as opposed to the Cranes, the British, who had come out from Newark and formed Cranetown. But anyway, so let's see. And I'll put the reservoir in here now. So many people don't realize, or some people don't, that the reservoir is a man-made feature. And the city of Newark purchased land from Cedar Grove in 1899, and the reservoir was operational by 1905. You can see that Normal Avenue was originally called Fifth Avenue. They changed the name to Normal Avenue in about 1908 when the Normal School was built, today's Montclair State University. Originally it was the Normal School, which is for some reason what they called teaching schools. So you'll see on some of the older maps, Fifth Avenue instead of Normal Avenue. When we jump ahead a little bit to 1906, the reservoir is there. By this time, by 1906, if someone told you to meet them at the corner of Ridge Road and Fifth Avenue, they were basically telling you to jump in the lake, because that road, they no longer intersected unless you swam through the reservoir. So you can see that this area, You can see that the area to the left of Fifth Avenue, south of Fifth Avenue, some of the names there, Sellew, Spear, Van Riper, those are big names in Upper Montclair land ownership. So people just own, various private people just own the land. And also Horace Osborne and Marsellis is the name of the quarry that operated. So we see those names, those are familiar names. So this is 1906. As we get into, around this time and as we went into the teens, a lot of the professions of landscape architecture and urban planning were beginning. As early as 1896, there was a New York Times article that talked about Essex County Park Commission's plans for a mountain park with Eagle Rock as the base, but extending all the way up to Van Geysen's Gap, which is what today's Bradford Avenue. So people had been talking since the late 1800s about preserving the entire top of First Mountain, and of course that didn't happen. John Nolan was a planner, a landscape architect and planner in the early 1900s, who was advising Montclair and many other towns in Essex County about sort of how to manage the exponential growth they were experiencing, was in trying to find ways to protect the beauty of this, the natural beauty of these towns, was suggesting things like a circuit drive, which would be, you would incorporate Ridgewood Avenue, Upper Mountain Avenue, you would just have these beautiful scenic drives for people. And this particular graphic, although not super crystal clear, was done by the Olmsted firm in 1915, proposing a parkway, which is a connected greenway that would have gone from Eagle Rock all the way up to the land in Cedar Grove. So of course none of these came to fruition. I can only imagine it was cost was a factor. And as early as 1931, minutes from the Essex County Park Commission indicate that citizens from Montclair and Cedar Grove were requesting that the Park Commission secure these lands on top of First Mountain. So Cedar Grove and many people were eyeing the mountain to preserve it for what would eventually become mills. But this is a good 25 years before anything like that happened. This 1933 map shows that now you'll notice there's fewer landowners. The plots are larger. Still some of the same names, Sellew. There's a developer up there, Tremont developer, and also the green shaded area is the Episcopal Diocese of Newark, which intrigued me tremendously. I for many years tried to figure out, what was going on with why they had property there. And I heard from, some of you may know or may have known Nancy Knertzer, who I befriended a few years before she died. Her mother had moved to Highland Avenue in 1898 when she was a little girl, and Nancy lived around Highland Avenue most of her life. She was told by her father that the diocese was going to build a retreat up there, which makes a lot of sense, and it would be a lovely place. Now I want to just put things into a little bit of a larger context for what was happening in the region. This graphic gives you can see exponential growth in the population. This is the population of Montclair from 1880 to 1930, and driven by the train. So the trains really spurred population growth in Montclair and other communities like ours. The first train came into Montclair in Lackawanna Plaza in 1856, and so people could travel to Hoboken and then take a ferry across to New York. In 1873, the second train line, which terminated in Jersey City, came through with stations from Walnut Street up to Montclair Heights. So with those trains came development. The farmlands were turned over to residential properties. People moved out here in droves from Newark, from Brooklyn, from Manhattan, from New York City. And our population rose, as you can see, exponentially. In 1930, it was 42,000 people, and that's less than it is today. People were moving away from situations like this in New York City. It was congested. They were coming out for that healthful mountain air. And so this is a typical family, the Moore family in Upper Montclair in 1904. The father was an insurance executive in New York City, and here is the young family heading into the city, maybe for lunch with grandpa or with dad or shopping with grandma, who knows. But and also people like Benjamin Moore lived here in the early 1900s. He lived in a house on Upper Mountain Avenue. So it was quite attractive to move out here. Lots of growth. And an interesting article in the Montclair Times, actually, in 1932, projected Montclair's population would rise to 100,000 people by 1965. So most of the things that they predicted, and it was done by a planning professional, and most of the things he predicted did not come true. The only one that did was the electrification of the rail line, at least up to Montclair State. But they never got their subway, and they never completed that third rail line in Montclair as they had talked about doing. Now let's go back to the mountain, and here we are at that 1933 map again, and I've highlighted the Episcopal Diocese property that was shown there. I finally was able to get into the archives at the Episcopal Diocese, and I was really surprised by what I found out. And they were actually planning to build a cathedral, not a retreat, but a cathedral. And on top, in what is in that property in today's present-day mills. So the diocese was citing that projected Essex County population growth that was also cited in that Montclair Times article in 1932. They also were really confined, Trinity Church, which is at Broad and Rector Street in Newark. By this time, by the 20s, they were really hemmed in by other development in Newark, and many of their parishioners, and certainly their wealthy parishioners, were moving out to other Essex County communities. They were really planning for the future. They purchased about 40 acres with a very long-term plan to build into the future. They just wanted to secure the property. And they ended up owning it from 1931. I've seen tax records from 1931 to 1941, but I learned recently, or saw evidence recently, that they were in fact the entity that sold their 40 acres to Davella Mills, the people who eventually donated to the Essex County Park. So they owned it for a very long time. And these are the tracts that they bought. Some of the names are familiar, Sigler, Van Riper. And their files included a couple of undated photographs, but this is Normal Avenue looking east towards Upper Mountain. And if you zoom in on it's not a super quality picture, but the sign actually says Cathedral Grounds of the Episcopal Church, Diocese of Newark. So this was a real thing. This was, there were newspaper articles, and there were church communications. There were these pictures. This is looking towards Cedar Grove. There was also, much to my delight, this picture of a baptism in the woods. The bishop baptized a young Montclair resident in the woods in 1932. So they were definitely had their sights on building that cathedral. Also in the files, I didn't find any plans. I found 2 letters of introduction for architects. One was written, one was for an architect, Frank Hutton. It was written by a priest from Brooklyn. The architect had done work for him there. The other was sort of, so anyways, there were 2 letters, no plans, but so for this architect, Frank Hutton, I couldn't find a church that he had designed, but this was a parish house. He had designed this, and so the pastor of the Grace Church was the one who wrote the letter of introduction, encouraging the bishop to consider him, because it was public information. It had been published that they were building a cathedral. He was encouraging him to give the assignment to Frank Hutton. So there were never any plans developed, but I searched, just Googled around for cathedrals, Episcopal cathedrals in the region, and of course, you have St. John the Divine, and then you have this other big one out in Long Island, in Garden City. And cathedrals are not small structures. I mean, cathedrals are big, grand structures. So although there are no plans in the files, I think it is pretty safe to presume that they would have built a cathedral of cathedral-sized proportions had they been able to go ahead with their plans. in the end, the cathedral is, it's called Trinity and St. Philip's Cathedral. They closed their cathedral chapter. They merged it with Trinity, which that site in which this church sits is hugely historic. I mean, they used that site as a hospital during the Revolutionary War. It was really trash. They had to rebuild the church, but the tower is actually old. Anyways, and then in the 60s, they merged with a black Episcopal church. It was very progressive. So now it's Trinity and St. Philip's Cathedral. So moving on from the Episcopal days, so that to me was pretty interesting. That was what almost might have been in Mills, and how different that would have been than what we experience up there today. But so their plans didn't work out, and so then enter David Mills and his wife Ella, and the spark plug that made them millions of dollars. He was a Canadian-born man. He was Canadian-born. He invented this Raha spark plug, and I just learned that the factory for his spark plug was actually on Bloomfield Avenue near Watsessing Park. So he was a real Essex County kind of guy, and they made all this money. When his wife died, they had no children. They lived on Upper Mountain Avenue. When his wife died, well, first of all, in their lifetime, they were philanthropic. They donated the money to build what is now considered the United Way building on South Fullerton. But if you actually look at that, it says Mills Building on it. They also donated the money for the Mountainside School of Nursing. And so they were pretty generous in their lifetime. But when Ella died in 1931, half their fortune was put into the Davella Mills Foundation. And then when David died in 1944, the rest of their fortune went into the fund, and it was liquidated by 1955 by plan. They didn't intend for it to stick around. There's a funny article in the New York Times that actually the fact that his wealth was based on GM stock made it kind of hard for the trustees, because they just kept the amount of money they had at their disposal just kept going up and up, and so they just had to keep finding ways to get rid of the money. But so the fund gave to lots of local causes, religious, charitable, scientific, and educational purposes. They donated the money to buy land up at Mills. They have McMaster University Library, NYU Law Center. They contributed to needs in Cedar Grove and all around. So the foundation did. Let's see. So in 1952, the Davella Mills Foundation purchased the various lots that would become the bulk of Mills Reservation. So they purchased those 40 acres from the Episcopal Diocese and from those other private landowners. It wasn't the entirety, though, of the land we now consider Mills Reservation. In 1954, this is an early survey map of the property and just showing the various plots. And there was some question about whether the Davella Mills Foundation would donate the land to Essex County Parks Commission or to the Township of Montclair. If it had gone to the Township of Montclair, the Citizens Committee that was in charge of the Iris Gardens would have been responsible for it. Residents of Cedar Grove objected, and because they felt unwelcome in parks in Montclair, so they preferred if the Essex County Parks Commission took control of it. And the Olmsted firm didn't think they should have accepted it at all. I think they only wanted it if they could also get the reservoir, which was not part of the deal. But anyways, Essex County Parks ignored it and accepted the donation. And here is in 1958, one of the early Olmsted Brother landscape architecture design or preliminary design. So they're kind of shocking in that they look nothing like what Mills looks like. But you can imagine, so here is a 100-car parking lot on Normal Avenue. Here's another 100-car parking lot off Edgecliff Road. Here's yet another 100-car parking lot off of Reservoir Road. These are scenic overlooks. There were 2 of them. There were stables. There were picnic areas. But you can imagine that by this time, Olmsted firm had a big tool of park kits that they could apply to any site. And so these were just preliminary designs. The woman I referred to previously, Nancy Knurzer, also told me that when they were figuring this out, they had community meetings, what kind of parks people would like. Would they like a passive park? Would they like one with many features? And the community overwhelmingly wanted a passive park, sort of like what we have today. In this so this is the 1958 preliminary design, but notice in the yellow highlighted areas, those are still lands that are not owned by Essex County Parks. So it hadn't reached its full 157 acre capacity yet. There were, these were areas that Essex County Parks would wheel and deal for on their own to make mills what we know today. This particular plot that was right across from the reservoir along Ridge Road and Reservoir Road, they swapped. The Park Commission gave up some land in Branch Brook Park to the city of Newark so that they could have this land here in Mills. And so in that area of Branch Brook Park, the city of Newark built Barringer High School. So that was how they got that piece of land. And these are just some of the other designs. In 1961, you can see there was an entrance along Reservoir Road, and where they wanted to, another huge parking lot, children's playground, all things that never came to be. And I want to just point out on the right that along Normal Avenue, there was something on the plan called a gate. So I think we'll see that in another slide. A later plan, 1963, they're still designing all these things, a softball stadium, or softball diamonds, and other buildings that never came to be. Now I just want to touch on some of the little mysteries about Mills. So first of all, the house on the corner, some people have never even noticed it, but it's right at the corner of Normal and Reservoir Road. I mean, if everybody has seen it, when there's no leaves on the trees, you can see it as you're in Mills, but also as you're driving around, you can see their driveway. So those people just never sold to Essex County Parks. So that house has just been there. This is a fun then and now picture. And when you look at the picture on the left with the horse and buggy, you can imagine how tremendous that must have been in the early part of the century to think about a parkway where you would have gone in your horse and buggy on these beautiful trails on top of the mountain. And of course on the right, I can't believe how fast people drive around that curvy road. I go there often and I'm like, let's just look at the scenery. But you gotta really pay attention. I also want to talk a little bit about the quarry, which features, heavily into our whole town, but also into Mills and the Hawkwatch. So in this map, you can see that the area that's highlighted is the area off of, so you see Bradford Avenue is misspelled. It's spelled Brandford, but that's really Bradford Avenue. And you go down Highland, and it was only a partial street because Osborne and Marsellis Quarry took up quite a bit of property there. And so that backed up, here we go, you can see. So here's the quarry in action, and you can see the horse and buggies doing the work in the early years of the quarry. And at that time, they depended on steam power to bust up those rocks to power their machinery. And if you have been in Mills, you can recognize that when you're in Mills, you're standing at the top of that cliff and you're looking down into the former quarry. On the right is an ad for the outfit, Osborne and Marsellis, and basically the quarries yielded a tough igneous rock called basalt. That in the trade they called it trap rock. They called it trap rock because trap is, I guess, a German, in German means step. And as you know, if you're up at Mills and you're walking around, it's like there's all these little steps and you're tripping over or walking over. So that was a very hard rock, but they were able to crush it to make gravel for roads and railway beds and things like that. The other stone was, the trade name was brownstone, but it was sandstone. So those are types of rocks that you see in some of the oldest buildings in town. I do a program with the third graders at Bradford, and we walk around the neighborhood and we go up to the Montclair Heights, what was the Montclair Heights Reformed Church there on the corner valley of Mount Hebron, and it is made of boulders of trap rock, and you can see it's a very iron-rich rock, and so you can see the little rusty threads running through it. And some of our other oldest buildings obviously have brownstone foundations. Some of our oldest homes have those. And I have this map at the back. It's a 1908 geological survey just to give you a sense of all the quarries that were along the first mountain. The one that's circled in red is the one that was Osborne and Marsellis, but they were up and down the ridge. So, Rocks were big business back in the day, and the mountains were a big source of business. This old 1976 map just, you can see Quarry Point there, and you can see the circular feature there. And so we wonder, what is this thing? And we know that Evan was definitely bit by that bug. What is that thing? And he's gonna talk a lot more about that. But some of the things that I had found out from people, some theories were, well, we know that the quarry below needed water for steam power. And we also know that the residents needed water. And I had heard from an old timer at a laundromat once that the people on Highland Avenue didn't have very good water pressure, so they needed the water tower. And some of the old maps clearly show in that area the words pipe, standpipe, tank. So clearly there seems to have been a water function there at some point. And then also what I had learned from the Cedar Grove Historical Society some years ago was that there was a light there, and it was a defense mechanism during World War II, a high-powered searchlight. And it seems perfectly reasonable that it could have been both things, that it would have served a water function and then they repurposed it for some sort of defense structure later in the evolution of mills. But Evan will talk much more about that. So there's also another little mystery about mills is these pillars that are kind of in the middle of nowhere when you're walking on the east side. So they, and I have the map over there, you can see it. On the map, you can see the two little pinpoints, and it says plaque. So at that point, the Mills Trail dips into Mountainside Park, apparently, and then it goes back up into Mills. And I think this is directly above, so if you were going like by the Iris Gardens, or south of the Iris Gardens, if you were going up Laurel Place, and then you kept walking up to Highland, there's a steep grassy slope that brings you up to Mills. This was how people would enter. I think they thought a lot more people would walk that way. And so there's an entrance to Mills there. And then this next feature is not in, this is actually in Mountainside, it's not in Mills. It's a huge cement bench. If you walk up from Highland Avenue up into Mills, as I described, you would encounter this huge cement bench. And Lee Sandrenner, who's the historian for Friends of Anderson Park, who's here, she and I do a lot of research and programs together, and we researched this. And so what we found out was that that bench was a memorial bench for Alex Capron, and the inscription, it drove us crazy because we couldn't really read the whole inscription until we researched in the newspaper and stuff. So this place has been built by the Friends of Charles Alexander Capron to commemorate the great talents, unflagging energy, and generous spirit he brought to a life of service. He was very involved in Montclair, the planning board, and also the Episcopal Church. And so his friends did this in his honor. And from what we understand, it was a beautifully landscaped little picnic area, bench. And Lisa and I have been trying to convince some Eagle Scout to take it on. And so if anybody knows an Eagle Scout who's looking for a project, this would be a great one. But in the meantime, I've also heard from a lot of other people that there's lots of partying that went on by that cement bench in the 70s and probably today still. Another mystery are these two pillars on Normal Avenue that are a little south of today's entrance. So if you look closely, these pillars are they're a little rougher and a little more rustic than the ones that are at today's entrance. So Kathy Cool, who is the archivist at Essex County Parks, she has a theory that these predate Mills, and that Mills, the architects designed the pillars, the official pillars of Mills, sort of in keeping with some of this hardscaping that was already present on the site. And I recently read about a process where you can measure moss on rocks and stuff, and you can date it. So I would love to do that and try to figure out how old some of these things are. But you remember from the maps that there were different landowners, and some people had a wall around their property or these pillars. There's also, I'll show you on one of the maps, there's a little road called Ferncliff Road that these could have been although it's a very skinny entrance. I'm not sure, but And then, and this slide, which was a 1961 plan with this weird parking area that never happened, but you can see that the little yellow circle is a gate, and that's really about where those pillars are. So maybe it was a functioning gate at some point. And here's the map from, there's those same pillars again, and the Ferncliff Road on the 1933 map. So, you know, it doesn't seem like it would have been a super, I mean, it's a very skinny road, but I don't know. And I also just wanted to touch on the Lenape Trail that runs through Mills, and many of you are probably familiar with the blazes and you know how to follow them. And there's 19 parks in all, and recently the New York, New Jersey Trail Commission prepared a new map of the entire Lenape Trail, and they're working with a lot of the individual partners that take care of different sections on the Lenape Trail. And so I just wanted to point out that you know, that they have this new map. You can go to their website, or you can, I didn't find the map on their website, I got it at a meeting. If anybody wants this map, you can just give me your number and your name and email, and I'll email it to you after the fact. And I also just wanted to point out that there's a Friends of Mills Facebook page that was just made by residents. It's the Montclair History Center is not affiliated with it, nor is the Essex County Parks Commission. And there's not a lot of activity on it, but if you're interested in joining that, I just wanted to point that out. And that is, that's the end of my presentation. And I have a couple, typically I've done a little bit on the Hawk Watch and on the Bird Club, but I'm certainly not going to do that when Evan can do that. So I'm going to hand it over.
Okay, what we're looking at here, if anyone's ever been to the Montclair Hawk Watch, this is what when you're at the Fall Watch, this is what you would be looking at across Quarry Road to where the Spring Hawk platform is. Does everyone recognize that? Who's been there? Now, I take my dog up there almost every day, and I'm one of many people who frequent the Hawk Watch. And when I started doing my research, trying to figure out what the heck that cement platform was, as I mentioned earlier, I've been told all these different theories, and for the life of me, I could not get any answers. And I went on Facebook and asked people, and I got dozens of theories. Most people gave me a link to Wikipedia, going back to the same thing, that it was a water source for the quarry, which you see there as the active quarry. And then in World War II, it was a platform where a anti-aircraft artillery stood to sort of a sentry to look out against the airplanes. Now, to me, if that was the case, that would be really cool, because the idea that the people who were on the top of that quarry were looking at the same birds as we're looking at now, to me, that was just fascinating. And then I started thinking, are these people who were up there during World War II, were they during their downtime looking at birds? Now here's some of when the quarry was taken over by the Bird Club, Wayne, do you know who that is in that slide?
Biden Jr. Really started happening in the early 1970s, and he turned the Hawk Watch into a full-time Hawk Watch for 3 months in the fall, and then in 2 months in the spring.
So what we're looking at here now is sort of the beginnings of the Hawk Watch, where it was once a quarry, and that was taken over by the Montclair Bird Club and turned into what is now the second oldest continuous hawk watch in the country. And Wayne, who is this?
That's Suzanne Count, who is also a member of the Bird Club, and Suzanne was one of the founders of the Hawk Watch in 1957.
And to me, what's really neat when Wayne sent me these photos is, this was, 60, 70 years ago, and it's no different today. We're still sitting in the lounge chairs, we're still looking up at the same species, and we're still trying to stay warm with our scarves. And I'm hoping that 50 years from now, our kids and grandkids will be showing pictures of us doing the same thing. Now fast forward to, this is from this year. What you can see, this is the fall platform, and across the way you can see sort of just between the guy with the green shirt and the person with the blue shirt pointing up is the cement platform, which is the big mystery here. So this is the view. If you take a look here, and then the next slide. Oh, now here is the entrance to the quarry. This would have been in the 1950s. I'm a little out of order here, but what I want to get you to is here. This is the cement platform. All right, so this is the big mystery. I thought I was going to come empty-handed today because I never, what I was looking for was sort of the holy grail. Is there a photo of somebody on this platform during World War II doing something that would have indicated that this was used to protect us from during World War II? And I have not been able to find any photographic evidence, but through the Cedar Grove Historical Society, we did find out that there were actually troops that were living in Mills Reservation during World War II, and they actually used that base as sort of their headquarters, where they had what was called Light 13. There was a series of lights stretching all around the perimeter of New York City, and in each of each was 3 miles apart from one another. So there's a series of lights stretching all the way, and this was the 13th light. But still, I did not know if this was true or not until today. Finally, someone called me back, and it was a guy. I'm going to go to the next slide here. It was a guy who, for a living, hold on. You see the light on the left? It's a guy for a living. He rents these lights for Hollywood premieres. Now, these lights are 800 million candle power. And these were the lights that were used during World War II as searchlights. So what you'd have is at every 3 miles apart, you would have a group of 8 men doing 48-hour shifts, just looking up in the sky, looking to see if there were enemy planes coming. And so what we had in the same spot where we have the Spring Hawk Watch, there were actual men, soldiers, who would be living in Mills Reservation at 48-hour stretches, just looking in the sky for enemy aircraft. Now the plan was, if they did see enemy aircraft, they had I'm going to show you the next. Oh, the thing to the right is, I'll get to that in a second. In fact, I could go back and forth here. That's the radar. I mean, so you're looking, this was on Mills Reservation, one of these things, which to me, I was shocked that there's no evidence, anything, that how do they keep something like this hidden is beyond me. But apparently, they did not want the Nazis or anybody to know what we were doing, so they did a pretty good job of keeping Mills secure during World War II. Now, if I could go to the next one, this is what they used. These are 3-inch M2 rifles. These were used as a last resort. The first resort, if they did see a plane, they would communicate to Fort Mitchell, which is in Long Island, via telephone, and they would send out aircraft to engage with the enemy aircraft. And if that didn't work, they would try to shoot them down. So basically, at that cement platform, we had radars, we had guns, and we had, let me go backwards a little, this crazy thing on the right, which was used to detect sound. Now, apparently, it worked horribly. They had, I think it took 3 people to use the device, and it was a way to magnify sound, but compared to using radar, it was like 1/10 as effective. So quickly that became obsolete, and then the radar here took over. Now, the people who lived in Mills were from South Carolina and Georgia, National Guardsmen. A lot of them ended up marrying people from Cedar Grove. They would have dances at night to entertain them, and apparently they would have potlucks. And so to me, I think it's fascinating that there's this whole world at Mills, and it took me for an accident to find that this actually occurred. And still, we're still looking. I'm hoping someone, through our efforts is going to come forward and say, oh yeah, my great uncle was there, and here he has a whole shoebox full of photos. So far nothing. Let's see here, as I scoot ahead. That's pretty much my huge. That's this up. So let me go back to here. So the details I got today, that there was an 8-person crew working 48-hour shifts. Then they would get a 24-hour break, 2 men at a time. Now, if there was a radar involved, it was a 15-man crew. So it was incredibly labor-intensive. They had to drag the stuff up. They dragged it up from the entrance on Normal Ave through that path where the old road is, where what Helen showed you, and from 1941 to 1943, they had a presence, and then from 43, it when we started really winning the war, it became less of an important part of the protecting the United States. But for those first couple of years, it was a big deal, and we had those every 3 miles, stretching all up and down the Watchung Reservation, along the Watchung Ridge. And that's it. Now I'm wondering, does anybody have any questions regarding?
Where would they have? Did the soldiers actually pitch tents somewhere nearby? Is that what you're saying? That they needed?
Yeah, according to Cedar Grove History Center,
I understand. I had exchanged an email with Chris Wernley, who was the president. He's since passed away. He's the president of Cedar Grove. Was president of Cedar Grove Historical Society, and I believe that his was a first-hand account. He was an older man, and that they lived like along they down from, like on the.
They lived on the northern edge by Ridge Road. Mm-hmm. So sort of like the corner where the reservoir, and what would be the northwest corner of the park.
Interesting.
That sounds unreal to me. And nobody in town knew about this. And where are the other every 3 mile locations around?
Was it 3 or 6?
Yeah, that would be really interesting to find.
There was another one. Was it actually? I didn't read this, but there was a newspaper article in the Ancestral Archaeologist blog site. Liz Lynch, a Montclair resident who has, she had done a little bit of research, and she had found an article that talked about.
Oh yeah, sure.
She found a December 1941 article. Air raid patrols went on duty at 6 o'clock last night on the top floor of Essex Mounting Sanatorium, which was on the top of Second Mountain. At the request of the State Defense Council Chairman, that such patrols be established all over the state. As requested that patrols be established at 6-mile intervals, Verona is ready to establish another one on the ridge of the first mountain if Montclair does not do so. So keep in mind, that site's actually in Cedar Grove. Yeah. So keep in mind, there's only a little sliver of mills that's in Montclair.
Yeah, and the other thing I was told is that they're 3 miles apart, but you don't have to have the guns every 3 miles. They would have the radars every 6 miles, but the lights every 3 miles, because that was the most important thing, was to be able to see at night. Yes.
It's my understanding you think there was a light there, but was there that sound gizmo that you had up there? Do you think that was up there?
That's all up for grabs. Everything I'm getting right now is all projected. This is the way it was planned out. They don't know specifically each spot what was there, but according to the way it was mapped out, this would have been there. A radar, it would have been 50-50 that there was a radar there, but it would have been the sound machine or the radar and the light, and everyone had guns.
And what particular source tells you that there was a light there? What particular source?
Oh, who did I get that from?
Yeah.
I got that from the historian at Fort Mott, which is in the Delaware Bay. He's done research because they had the same system protecting the Philadelphia area and the Delaware Bay.
That was an army,
Yeah, historian.
And also, that confirms what I've been told by the president of Cedar Grove Historical Society, who had told me, 6 years ago, that there was Light 13, he had many details that have been shared. So that confirms that. And actually, the woman, Nancy Knerzer, who I keep mentioning, she remembers a light. She doesn't remember a gun, but she remembers a light. She lived on Highland Avenue right below Mills. And people, but it is shocking that more people who were in youngsters and roaming around Montclair at that time don't have a more clear idea of what was up there.
Yeah, and to me, that's like, of course, that's a no-brainer. Why didn't people see that? And talking to different historians, I got the same answer from everybody, which is that this was top secret stuff. They did not want the enemy knowing what was up there, because this was, vital to the protection of the United States.
And it wasn't parked yet.
No.
So it wouldn't be like the people were accustomed to going up there on their, on a whim.
But people did go up there.
If they saw it,
Jim,
maybe they
just
had-
go up there.
But I'm sure it was protected by
Some armed
the same.
sentries.
Yeah, the same way you go up to Patterson during World War II, and they had armed sentries at every munitions factory, and even factories that made things like spark plugs that were just important for the war cause. That was one of the most vital interests, was keeping these factories going during World War II for the war effort. So they had to protect them at all costs.
Can you just clarify a little bit how that light was used? I mean, were they actively turning that light on and searching the skies with it? In which case you would think people would see it locally.
No, they would only use it if those either through radar or from that wacky hearing device if they heard aircraft. You didn't have as many planes in the sky like you do now. And this is 800 million. I can't even imagine, what is 800 million candle power? I mean, the light that must project is just insane.
Of the 13 lights that you mentioned, is the cement pad the only one that exists, or were all these lights on cement pads?
I think, my guess is the cement. Yeah, oh yeah. She was wondering, was each of these, Light 13, Light 12, Light 11, were they all on cement platforms? My guess is that was a water source. That was at one point the platform for a water tower. And it just made sense. You need a nice, strong, flat,
Right,
sturdy object
reused it.
either for the gun or for whatever, and they just used it. And I'm sure that whole area is very rocky and very flat. That whole area was sort of a compound.
At which point, I guess the water source must not have been necessary if they were able to use it to move it out of the way. Anyway.
Well, they didn't need it for steam power in the quarry anymore.
Well, that's
No.
true.
So
What about the
Yes.
pressure on Highland
they may have figured that out by then.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Do we know whatever happened with the whole plans? Well, we live right near Mills, and we spent the last 4 years fighting building the cathedral right up on that hill. So we know what happened to the plans for the Episcopal Cathedral. Should it just
Well, they
dwindle
just-
away, or was there?
Yeah, they just went away.
What's that?
They just went away.
Okay.
They decided to keep, I mean, the cathedral of the Diocese of Newark in Newark. So for a variety of reasons, they didn't choose to build there. Yeah.
What I remember from that round stone is that kids would climb on it, and then kids would go on the other side of the quarry road, on the other promontory on the rock, on July 4th, and they would send rockets and firecrackers to
Well, one popular thing, I could go back a few slides, this is that I grew up a few towns over, so I knew nothing about this until I started going to the Hawk Watch when I was a kid. But it's something called Devil's Slide. Does anyone know about that? Devil's Slide, which is here, there was sort of people would slide down what is now below the platform to the grass of the people with the red house, their backyard. And daredevils.
Oh, I got to tell you about the Red House.
Oh, yeah. We all know about the red house.
What do you know? What do you know? I heard that an architect built it in the 60s around the big boulder, and the boulder was in his house and he built his home around it. So, but I know that he doesn't necessarily have the friendliest dog, so I've never knocked on that door. But, did you know something else?
No, it had to do with the fact that when we're up in the spring platform that it's not the friendliest dog.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. And you can probably imagine living in a home where have people above you have binoculars all day long is, probably didn't sign up for that. Yes.
Did you ever find out anything else about the yellow house, the supposed yellow house?
Oh,
there?
yeah, so there was, I haven't found out about the yellow house. There was a house on Normal Avenue in the property that is now Mills, and I've heard that, their son was in World War II, and it was a yellow house, and it had a stone base, but and if you walked along the northernmost edge of Mills along Normal Avenue, you actually see some foundations that seem like a house. But so I haven't been able to find anything in the Montclair records, and I wonder if it's a Cedar Grove thing. Again, my research is fits and starts, and I haven't tapped into everything Cedar Grove may have their tax records or whatever. So that is a mystery to be solved. But there definitely was a house on Normal Avenue between Highland and the entrance to Mills.
Wayne?
First, I want to thank you both so much for giving us some insights into these incredible mysteries. And I just want to mention to everyone the Spring Hawk Watch is actually starting up again on Friday. There'll be someone up there every day from March 16th to May 15th. The hawk counter is named David Brown. Not only will he count hawks, he will help explain a bit to anyone who visits about migration, how to identify hawks. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, please visit the platform during the spring migration and have a chance to witness the natural spectacle.
Yeah, and I'm still soliciting any photos that old timers might have, and anybody who could possibly have the Holy Grail, which is a photo of the actual soldiers on that platform. And my biggest wish is to find a photo of guys in military with binoculars looking at birds. Mm-hmm. So whatever it is, hopefully we could coordinate, and I'll post a blog on the Montclair Bird Club website with whatever photos we can find and additional findings.
Great. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you for being here with the Montclair Bird Club. Check out our website at montclairbirdclub.org. Please get one of our rack cards, put it on your refrigerator. Remember to come back for another meeting. And if anyone has the email list that I've sent around, please leave it at the back table. Again, thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope to see you again.